There were a lot of good games I played this year, and I couldn't quite decide which one to make a full video about, so I decided to talk about all of them. Let's get straight into it. The first new release of this year that I really sunk my teeth into was Tears of the Kingdom. I'm relatively inexperienced with the Zelda franchise. I tried Ocarina of Time on the N64, and I didn't jive with it and assumed Zelda wasn't my thing. I originally passed on Breath of the Wild because of this, but because so many people were raving about how it was the best game ever and a life-changing experience, I decided to give Zelda a second chance. After a 35-hour playthrough to the credits, I was left satisfied, but not enamored as so many others were. I wasn't pulled into the open world of Hyrule in Breath of the Wild, and I played it as a linear campaign, only focusing on the main story objectives. With Tears of the Kingdom, I was completely hooked by the open world. I was exploring every nook and cranny for secrets and upgrades. I completed dozens and dozens of side quests and adventures, and at first, it felt odd to me that I enjoyed Tears of the Kingdom so much more than Breath of the Wild. However, over time, I think I've come to realize what made the sequel resonate with me so much more. The main differing factor for me was the addition of the Sky Islands. Launching out of the map towers was the most satisfying part of the whole game. The way the music swelled up while looking so far out into the horizon was mesmerizing. Upon exploring each set of the Sky Islands, I always found it to be a fun puzzle figuring out how to reach the next set of islands with the tools I had on and the resources around me. Launching myself with pistons and rockets from island to island gave me that same feeling as soaring across the cosmos in Super Mario Galaxy I had experienced well over a decade ago. It was an addictive gameplay loop that kept me invested for the first segment of my journey. The second most important factor that made the sequel so much more fun for me to dive into were the four main powers. I found Breath of the Wild's power set uninteresting outside of stasis. Oh boy, I can make ice blocks on water for very niche puzzle instances and to stun a single boss during the story. On the other hand, these four new powers felt much more impactful on my moment-to-moment gameplay. Ascend was my favorite power of the bunch. Something about bypassing ceilings as a means for traversal activated neurons in my brain I didn't know were there. I'm honestly amazed I've never seen this power in another game before, and we probably won't be seeing something like Ascend in another game after either. Fuse was also a fun concept that I think brought some much needed depth and fixing to Breath of the Wild's combat. I'm not saying the combat was made perfect, but I found it much more palatable this time around. Fuse helped the durability problem for me a lot. In Breath of the Wild, by its mid-game, I found that fighting enemies always meant I was making a net loss of resources. My weapons would break, but the mob drops, such as horns and eyeballs, that I accumulated, didn't feel like they compensated for that loss because their only use was potions and selling. In the end, this made me want to avoid combat entirely. Now with Fuse, those horns are the weapons. Killing 4 silver-horned bokoblins with a silver bokoblin sword until it breaks means I'm now exiting combat with a profit of 3 more swords of the same value. Sure, the hilt on each sword could be different, but the hilt isn't where most of the damage comes from. It feels so much better to engage in these combat systems because Fuse makes enemy drops a more meaningful reward. On top of the melee weapons, applying eyes to gems and arrows for special effects also made me engage with bows a lot more in this game. Blowing up multiple enemies with a well-placed bomb arrow felt very satisfying and often worth the expense of the bomb flower. The only criticism I have is that Fuse definitely needs a smoother user experience because it gets a bit tiring to keep dropping items on the ground to fuse them instead of having a dedicated node in the inventory. Overall, I found Fuse to be a smart system that had a janky implementation and definitely needs some more refinement if it's going to return in a future Zelda game. While Rewind is the least flashy power, having a simple undo command in a sandbox game was super helpful. I also appreciated its interaction with falling debris. Quickly going up from one of these rocks was very fun, and I'm now realizing I just like going up at fast speeds. Ascend really does hit different though. And last but not least, there was Ultra Hand. From a design perspective, this power is insane. It gives you unlimited potential for creating tools to aid your adventure. It was a little disorienting to only be able to rotate a 3D object on 2 axes, but I got used to it after a while. And just when I was starting to get tired of manually building everything, auto build was a pleasant surprise I earned about midway through my journey. Auto build solves my main annoyance with Ultra Hand, which is keeping the gameplay active. Pulling vehicles and devices out of my ass in 5 seconds was a huge boon for my playstyle of jumping straight into action without any proper planning. Beyond these incredible powers, the third factor that made this game stick with me was how dense the open world was. The addition of caves, more mini-bosses, and refreshed shrines made combing the map addicting. The side quests that really hooked me were unlocking all the fairy fountains and working with Pen at the stables. These quests are where I felt the most connected with the inhabitants of Hyrule. On top of these quests, the Zonai also helped beef up the open world because they felt like a proper invasive force. Their tech littered Hyrule everywhere, and packs of Zonai soldiers would attack any group on sight, which just made the world feel more alive. I loved joining in on the chaos of Zonai and goblins battling each other. The only world activities I stopped bothering with early were helping the guy with the signs and helping any Koroks that needed to be carried to their friend. These activities were not fun, and the effort required was not worth the reward. By the end, there was only one true problem I had with this game, which was the story's pacing. Discovering Zelda's fate early does not properly sync with the rest of the story. Characters will still frequently ask about Zelda's whereabouts after you've obtained the Master Sword. Why does the story not dynamically adjust to this? I also did not enjoy that the memory cutscenes could be viewed in any order when they are clearly meant to be experienced in a linear fashion. These aspects create some heavy dissonance while receiving all the main story beats. Having the third cutscene I watch be the one where Sonia gets stabbed and then almost every cutscene after builds up Sonia's character felt a little backwards. Despite the many story pacing issues, I found myself smiling constantly with moments such as ascending into the Sky Temple, facing off against Master Koga and his large arsenal of Zonai vehicles, slaying my first Gleeok, and reacquiring the restored Master Sword. For anyone who finds big games like these overwhelming, I cannot stress enough to chop up the big picture into mini adventures. I only did the activities I wanted to and ignored the ones that didn't interest me, and I still ended up nearly putting 100 hours into the game. Overall, this game did an excellent job at satiating my appetite for adventure and left me with fun memories that will last a lifetime. What really stood out to me about Mario Wonder was its pure creativity. The rate at which it introduces new gameplay concepts was astonishing. The only other game I've played that introduces mechanics and concepts at such a fast pace is It Takes Two, and Wonder surpasses that pace tenfold. Every few minutes, there was some new idea presenting itself, and the impressive part is almost every idea was fun and engaging on top of being communicated very intuitively. You would think a game that adds a new mechanic every 3 minutes would become disorienting and overwhelming, but that was never the case. The level design language is masterfully written. I never finished a level and felt bored, confused, or exhausted because the game has a stride that never falters. If there's any problem, it's that I wanted to play 5 more levels with each of the concepts because they were just that good, especially the badge challenges. It was also impressive to me how the level design doesn't crutch on the wonder effects. Levels such as Kick It Out My Way, Color Switch Dungeon, and Beware of the Rifts were some of the best Mario levels I've ever played, and their wonder sections weren't the reason I think that. The surprise of the wonder effects made my first playthrough super exciting, but there's still solid level design baked into the game's core due to its wide enemy variety, badges, collectibles, and power-ups. This aspect is going to keep Wonder enjoyable for replay. The only part of this game that was disappointing were the boss fights. I'm not even annoyed about the easiness of them, it's just the fact they were straight up lame. Most 2D boss fights are lame, but it really sticks out in this game because the rest of the package is so strong, and this game could have broken that trend. Despite this shortcoming, this package is very strong and shows that Mario isn't done being innovative. Starfield did not turn out to be the game many expected it to be. I was just expecting more of that fantastical, immersive open world goodness I've been playing since Fallout 3, as well as all the jank that accompanies those worlds that Bethesda makes. Starfield met most of my expectations, didn't meet a few, but almost never surpassed any. There's a lot of good gameplay to experience. Entangled and Crix's Legacy are some of the best missions Bethesda has ever made. I enjoyed all 4 faction quests, although there are obvious spots for improvement that would have made them even more fun, such as a mech final boss for the Freestar Rangers. Some of the dungeons were also very well designed. The derelict ship that has its grav drive damaged, so gravity turns off and on every 20 seconds, was easily my favorite. The gunplay is also solid. All the guns felt satisfying to shoot. This is an area where I feel that Bethesda keeps drastically improving with every release. We've come a long way from Fallout 3, where we couldn't even ADS with non-scope weapons or sprint. VATS carried the combat pretty hard in that game. I think what brings this game's perception down to the public eye is that its shortcomings feel so easily avoidable. Why did melee release in this bad of a state, where there's essentially only one melee weapon? Fallout 76 has dozens of melee weapons that feel distinct from one another. Even the auto melee subfamily, consisting of the auto axe, Ripper, Chainsaw, and Mr. Handy Buzzsaw, have more variety than all of Starfield's melee offerings. Also, melee doesn't scale to make them viable in endgame content. There's really no land vehicle like the Mako from Mass Effect 1 to make planet traversal more entertaining and convenient. How did outposts regress in quality and quantity from Fallout 4 and 76's base building? These aspects aren't deal breakers on their own, but they make you start questioning the game's development, and this just kills your immersion. The locations themselves not being procedurally generated was the most disappointing surprise for me. How come rooms aren't randomized at all? It makes sense that there's dozens of cryolabs across the galaxy, but why are they the exact same building, with the exact same people, placed in the exact same spots? The loot in the overworld isn't even randomized. The fact that Bethesda did not make tile sets for each spot and have an algorithm that randomly assembles them and populates them with a random enemy type was truly shocking. Like I mentioned earlier, there's some good stuff in Starfield, and I overall enjoyed my time. But this isn't a game I'm telling people they need to play. The overall direction for how its ingredients come together creates a messy final vision that could have easily been so much grander. I should have had a disclaimer earlier, but this video contains a couple of games I played for the first time in 2023 that did not release in 2023. I just still wanted to talk about them. Outer Wilds is not a normal game. What makes Outer Wilds special is that its progression is based on knowledge checkpoints instead of new equipment or experience points. Normally in a game, you get an upgrade that allows you to do something that you couldn't do before. In Outer Wilds, getting an upgrade is learning something while exploring the solar system, face palming, and saying, I could do this the whole time? This newfound knowledge allows you to progress the game until you learn all the secrets in the system and can beat the game in 7 minutes. It takes time adjusting to this style of knowledge-locked game design, and the early game can be quite uncomfortable to get accustomed to, but if you can get accustomed to it, then it becomes one of the best video game experiences you will have in your life. Now, I beat Outer Wilds a few years ago and respected it, but I had some issues with Outer Wilds' endgame that kept it from being a top-tier favorite. Those problems mainly involved the Ash Twin Project, the Tower of Quantum Knowledge, and the Vessel. Near the beginning of this year, I watched someone else's playthrough of the base game, and their excitement throughout the whole experience was infectious and inspired me to give the DLC a try. Man, did I enjoy the DLC much more than the base game. Part of it was because I didn't have to waste time getting accustomed to the style of level design, but most of it came from the contents of the DLC. I preferred exploring the Stranger more than any of the base game planets. Its unique ring architecture means you can see the entire interior just by looking up. This allowed me to plan routes and cleanly navigate this space. Tighter navigation meant that I never had a moment of frustration or needing to resort to a guide like I did in the base game. During exploration, you're constantly peeling back the layers of this location to learn its secrets. Many secrets keep evolving into even more hidden secrets until you're in so deep in this experience, you finally reach one of the most beautiful endings to a game that I'm not going to spoil here. This DLC pushed me into the I Love Outer Wilds camp, and I'm eagerly looking forward to what this dev team will be making next, because their style of adventure and exploration is so unique from anything else available. I'm not a person who gets too enthralled by narrative-driven games like The Last of Us and Red Dead Redemption 2. I respect the work these teams put into these games to have a believable world and immersive story, but I've always been a man that enjoys my video games to be extra video gamey. Over-the-top action set pieces, secret loot, doors locked behind abstract puzzles, breakable pots and boxes, mounted turret sections, and a large side of red barrels. That's why survival horror is one of my favorite genres. These games seem to always have mechanics baked into their core that are super fun to play with, and they have great stories that don't sacrifice the integrity of their gameplay. This year had 3 very notable survival horror releases: RE4, Dead Space, and Alan Wake 2. Let's start with Alan Wake. Alan Wake 2 was not my first Remedy rodeo. I played Control a few years ago, and I loved it. I made sure to play Alan Wake 1 before 2 was released. I enjoyed the story a lot, especially the paranormal aspects of it, and Barry Wheeler, but the gameplay was showing its age. By the final chapter, I was getting really tired of shining my light on objects to disintegrate them. Don't even get me started on that TV boss fight in the DLC chapters. The sequel felt much better to play right off the bat. The gameplay isn't quite as crisp as what Capcom serves, but it was more than serviceable. The We Sing chapter is the main part of the game that gets talked about, and for good reason. There's nothing else quite like it, and its inclusion comes completely out of left field. The whole performance is directed exceptionally, and I've become a fan of Sam Lake because of it. If we end up seeing more live-action integration into other companies' releases, then we all know who to thank for that.
So first of all, who came up with the idea for this?
Well,
who was that person?
Who do you think came up with the idea for that? Let's be honest.
Well, I mean, I don't know. Maybe there's some genius at the back of the studio.
No, it's definitely Sam. And I remember him saying, I want to do a musical. And I was like, you're mental. What are you talking about?
While that part was exceptional, it was far from the only thing I enjoyed during the game. In Alan's half, David Harewood's performance as Mr. Door was always a treat to watch.
Creator of the character, how do you feel about this?
Sorry, what?
I know it can be an awkward question with the man sitting right next to you, but I mean, how do you feel about him in the role of Casey? Does he look the part to you?
The looping, light transfer mechanic, and the mechanic of rewriting the story script to change the level design made sure the dark place felt like navigating a nightmare. On top of that, the shadow enemies were a fresh horror threat that kept me tense while roaming the twisted passageways of an ethereal New York City, since I never knew which shadow was actually a threat. Then, there's a whole other half to this experience through Saga Anderson. Saga's investigation of Cauldron Lake leads to an array of more fantastic moments, such as exploring Coffee World, the Cynthia Weaver boss fight, and the summoning ritual at Cauldron Lake, which is an entirely different musical section that's almost as good as the We Sing chapter everyone's been talking about. On top of these sections, while our mind place didn't affect the gameplay like Alan's writer's room did, the vibes given while putting the note cards on the wall felt relaxing and was a nice welcome break from the action. Switching scripts to a different game, the Dead Space remake was my first outing with this series, and I enjoyed every second of it. The Stomp is such a satisfying video game mechanic to earn more loot, and the weapon variety was some of the strongest in this genre. Every weapon felt distinct and had depth with their skill trees and different firing modes. The Ripper became my favorite tool of Isaac's arsenal because you could use the blade as a spiky shield and then launch the blade when the timer was about to expire as a devastating final blow. Picking which limited systems to power within the space station to progress the level is genius level design, and it's a mechanic that really set Dead Space apart from anything else I've ever played. This allows you to choose your flavor of tension to the encounters. Do you want to turn off the lights and fight in the dark, or turn off the oxygen to add a stressful timer that limits your time in the room? At least you can see threats better with the latter option. I would love to see more games adopt this choose your poison mechanic and remix it to fit different styles of gameplay, because I think there's a huge well of untapped potential here. Finally, there's Resident Evil 4. I'm a newer Resident Evil fan. I started playing them 5 years ago, only playing all the games using the RE engine. They have all been high quality titles, and RE4 proves to be no exception. What I thought was superb about RE4 was its pacing. There is no section or chapter that felt like a chore to finish. Usually a game has that part, which contains some mixture of tedium or uncreative level design, but Resident Evil 4 is pure gold from start to finish. Another part of RE4 that was very impressive is that within the 2 playthroughs I've run so far, I have not run into bugs, extreme pop-in, or frame drops, which are usually common with games at this level of graphical fidelity. The experience was as smooth on a technical level as it was on a gameplay level. I definitely see more runs of this game in the future just because every chapter is pure bliss to play through. The only criticism I have that applies to all 3 of these games that would improve the horror experience is not having menus pause the game. My favorite survival horror game is Alien Isolation, and a big part of that is because you never feel safe. Hacking a door or opening your inventory doesn't pause the game to give you some time to breathe. You're not even safe while you save. Imagine how much scarier the Regenerador section would have been in RE4 if you're doing those terminal minigames and they didn't pause while doing them. I hope this year created a lot of new survival horror fans, because I just want to see this amazing genre of games get more support to become even better. Next, I want to talk to you about the most fun singular gameplay thing I played within a game this year, and I have 2 words for you: Strand Titan. If I'm not on your shit list already for sort of liking Starfield, then I probably will be when I tell you I really like Destiny. Destiny will forever be one of my favorite games of all time, and no amount of controversy from the studio who develops it, Bungie, will change that. Destiny's 9th year released my favorite gameplay loop of any game this year, the Strand subclasses. Strand is themed around the psychic strings that connect the memory of all living things, and all the new powers revolve around creating and breaking those strings. As presented in the Bungie's Lightfall Vidoc, the gameplay loop of Strand is about weaving those powers together to create a high action per minute combat rhythm. Here's an example of that rhythm. All 3 Strand subclasses play super well, but Titan's Berserker subclass ended up being the one that resonated with me the most. It's all about lowering enemy lethality so that you can easily push through the front lines, and it is fun as hell. I think that Destiny is the best game available for making you feel like a badass, and Strand raised that bar across the entire gaming ecosystem. The last game I want to talk about is an RPG that is pretty popular. It's got great writing, plenty of options to make fun character builds, and you can even romance non-human creatures. I'm of course talking about the Mass Effect Legendary Edition. I played this trilogy for the first time this year, and I was blown away with how fun it is and how immersive the world is. It is one of my new favorite games of all time, and I loved it so much I made a 90-minute video about my experience earlier this year. If you're interested in listening to a new player's thoughts of the series, then I recommend checking it out right after this video. The only new topic I want to add is that since that video was released, I played through Andromeda, and it was worse from what came before, but still solid. The open world part was completely dry and uninteresting, but I liked every crewmate not named Liam. I especially enjoyed Vetra, Jal, and Drax's company, and dragged them along with missions frequently. I think this game would have aged better with some solid sequels to help flesh out some of its weaker parts, mainly adding depth to the existing narrative, but I don't think those are ever going to happen. Now there's one part about this game that was unforgivable and almost made the game unplayable for me. There's no Quarians. Outside of the sci-fi RPGs I played this year, the really good ones had Quarians, and the others didn't. If Starfield had Quarians, I'm sure fan reception would have been much higher and the game would have had better popularity. It's just basic logic. Overall, this year was crazy for video games. I don't think I've ever had a year where I've had so many new games become top favorites. If you have any fun experiences with the game you've played this year and want to share, I'd love to read them in the comments below. Thanks for watching.